Okay, Birshut Morai Velabotai, Birshut Kol HaKal HaKadosh. I'm going to speak in English, even though my father wouldn't be so happy probably. He preferred whenever Divrei Torah were said that he felt that they should know Eno Domeh when it's spoken in Hebrew to when it's spoken in English. But because of the Kvod HaTzibur, and we're in America, in Miami, and at the end of the day, even though I should speak Spanish if we're in Miami, so it's not a raya, but if I'm here, so I'm going to speak in English, and I'm going to be mixing a few words in Hebrew if possible. It's very hard for me to begin speaking about my father because the truth is, when he passed away, I never had an opportunity to eulogize him. It was right in the beginning of Corona. It wasn't expected. I was speaking to him. During that time, I was going through a divorce. I was already separated from my ex-wife. I was living alone in Bat Yam. My mother came to be with me. And then she had to go back for Passover, for Pesach. She had to go back home. And I couldn't leave Israel, because in Israel, whoever's going through a divorce, he can't leave the country. There's something called a Tzadik Yitzia. So I couldn't leave the country. So I was there alone. And I was going through a very hard time, to say the least. Anybody that's been through a divorce knows what it is. To be separated, it comes at you like a ton of bricks. And it's something that no person, I don't wish it on any person. The day before my father passed away, I had a conversation with him. He didn't know anything was wrong with him. We didn't know anything was wrong with him. And he told me the following words. He said, David, you should know that in life, every person, we all have trials and tribulations. And every tzara that happens to a person, you shouldn't take it so intensely. Take it like a wave. A wave, when you're in the ocean, it comes at you with full force. It hits you a little, and then you stand back up. When there's a hurricane, there's a lot of winds outside, and it sounds very scary, and you feel like the world's over. But even after a few hours, or maybe even after a few days, or after a day or two, the hurricane subsides. The sun starts shining, and everything goes back to normal. The same is going to happen with this, don't worry. And then he added, I guess it was a small nevuah in his likabo, that no matter whatever is going to happen to you in life, I never want you to leave Torah. I don't know what I did, said my father, that I was zoche in my old age to have a son that went to yeshiva, that was sitting and learning. I never would have dreamt of it. And to me, it's the biggest bracha possible. And I know as hard as it is for you, do whatever you can to stay in the Arba Amot Shel Halacha, in the confines of Torah. My father, he came, I'll just give a small history about him. He was born in Israel in 1937. Before it was the state of Israel, it was still Palestine. He grew up in Shchunat Tikva. He did the army. Then after the army, he came to America. He started working in air conditioning in New York. He lived in Flatbush. He couldn't handle the cold. He came to Miami. The whole time he was not from. He got married to some American woman. She was Jewish, but you know how the Jews of the older American Jews were. They were very disconnected from their Judaism. He had a daughter. He got divorced. Then he lived in Miami alone. And I have an older sister. I don't really meet her because unfortunately she married a non-Jewish person. My father was very upset with it, but there's not much he could have done. And at one time, my father was very sick with a very high fever. And he asked his daughter, she was living also here in South Florida, he asked her if she can bring him some food. He was very hungry, he couldn't move, he had a very high fever. And he asked her, please bring me food. So she said, no, she's too busy. So my father was already 50 years plus, said, don't worry, one day I'm going to have a son and I'm not going to need you. That's the words that came out of his mouth. He didn't even think that my mother wasn't around in the picture, and I was not even a havamina of a havamina. My father said it. One day I'm going to have a son, I'm not going to need you. And lo and behold, my father got remarried at the age of 54, 55, and I was born to him when he was 56. And I can say I was his ben zikunim. People used to think that I'm his grandson, not his father. But Baruch Hashem. And my father was Chozel B'Tshuva in full force. He started with Chabad. He even went to Morristown to learn in the yeshiva there for a period of time. He connected tremendously with Torah. And I would always see my father learning at home. We have over here Mr. Yitzchak Elgavi, who knew my father for years. I think 35 plus years, maybe even 40 years plus. And my father would always sit and learn with me, would always sit and learn at home. Chok Israel, Navi, he had a Chok V'lo Ya'avor. Every day, Tikkun HaKlali he would do. And I grew up with that, watching that. And it's funny, sometimes I wonder, there was a big disconnect from me and my father. There were over 2 generations of a difference between me and my father. My father was 56 generation. If we say a generation is 25 years, so 25 times 2 is 50. There were more than 2 generations difference between us. And yet, he wasn't involved completely. Like, he would play with me. We would go play football. You know, we would watch the Dolphins games together, but on the screen, we never went to the game. One time, Mr. Elgavi took us, me and my father, to a Heat game, and we stood all the way on top, and for me, it was Mein Olam Haba. But I always wondered, how in Miami it's not so easy, you know, being religious, and how was it that I was able to remain religious in such an environment? Everybody has to understand, there's a lot of people that are new to Miami. Miami today is not the Miami of 25 years ago. You didn't have over 100 restaurants that were kosher. You didn't have a kollel. You only had one children's school. I know now I'm going back to North Miami Beach every time I come here for Shabbat, and I go back home and I see people walking, Jewish people walking on Miami Gardens Drive by Reynolds Park. And I remember, who would have ever thought there would be Jews, let alone where I live, behind the yeshiva, there were barely Jews walking around. Now there's all the way in Reynolds Park, many Jews. Miami is becoming a center, a metropolis of Judaism today, Baruch Hashem. But it wasn't like that. I would always wonder, how was it that that Baruch Hashem I was able to stay on the path of learning. And I think the secret is the power of tefillah that my father did every day. Every day my father would have a session of itbodedut. I can say straight up it was itbodedut. We live on a lake, and our apartment's facing the lake. And he would stand by the window every day and pray for approximately 20 minutes. His own tefillah, not shachalit, his own tefillah from the bottom of his heart. And he told me, I would pray for you that you should be matzliach in Torah, and you should be a religious Jew, and you should always keep the Torah. And I have no doubt that those tefillot are what gave me the zchut to be here today and have the zchut to give on Torah to other people. It was those tefillot. The tefillah of a person, we don't appreciate the power that tefillah can have. And he did it every day. I don't think there was a day that went by that he wouldn't make this tefillah. Even if sometimes he didn't go to minyan, he wasn't feeling well or he was feeling down. But that tefillah, he wouldn't pass on it. He would do whatever he can. And so when my father passed away, it was sudden. It was a sudden heart attack. We weren't expecting it. My mother came from Israel. She was with him for one day, and then the next morning, he had the heart attack. And it was something that was very unexpected. I, unfortunately, didn't have the opportunity to give him a proper eulogy. And I sat Shiva alone. It was Corona. People were scared to come. And I was really alone in Bat Yam. And it was a very hard time. I'm sharing with you, my kahal. It was a very, very hard time. Also a divorce. Also the passing of a father. Psychologists say that the 2 hardest things that can happen to a person are the death of a loved one and a divorce. And I had both within the span of 2 months. So I definitely don't wish on anyone. But Baruch Hashem, Hashem gave us the kochot to go through it. And sitting alone, I would always think about my father. Sometimes we don't appreciate what we have until we lose it. And I truly felt that way. I couldn't stop crying. And people will tell me, your father was very special. He came to shul every day. He was very makpid on not talking during tefillah. And yet, 3 years passed by, and something out of the ordinary happened. And that's why I decided that we have to do this meal today. People say it's a grandiose meal. It's such a beautiful meal. We decided to bury him in America. Like we said, we couldn't transfer his body out of Miami because of Corona. And he was buried here in America tonight. The halakha is that if you bury somebody and you want to move his body, you have to keep him in the ground for a year. And after a year, you can move him. However, the Zohar is not so pro moving somebody to Eretz Yisrael once you bury him. Additionally, the Ramban writes in Torat HaAdam that if when a person's kever is opened up, even if it's for a purpose of moving him from place to place, from a worse kever to a better kever, it still shakes the neshama, because the neshama feels that they're calling him to the Yom Adin Gadol V'Anula L'Tchiyat HaMetim. So it shakes the neshama, and it's not a simple thing. So some rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael told us, keep him in Miami and let him stay here. However, my mother, something bothered her. She said, can't be. My father would come to her in dreams, and she decided, too bad, we're moving his body. I wasn't so happy with that, but she's the boss. And she decided to move his body from Miami to Eretz Yisrael. I unfortunately couldn't go. My mom went. That day, a certain rabbi told me from Eretz Yisrael, he said, you should take upon yourself a day of ta'anit. It's a day of fasting. And of course, the halakha is the moment they exhume the body, you sit shiva again for that day. And you tear kriya without a bracha, which is what I did. And my mother goes to Israel to the levaya. My mother comes with my brother and her family to the Bet HaKvarot in Hala Menuchot, and they're waiting for the car of the Chevra Kadisha to come and bring the body. So of course we were all prepared. There's probably bones. There's not much left. He's been in the ground for 3 years. Miami, the humidity in Miami is extremely high, and humidity and heat together are a great formula for erosion and decay. And lo and behold, there was a very small minyan. It was 12 o'clock at night in Israel, if I'm not mistaken. It was, approximately 8 o'clock at night in Israel, if I'm not mistaken. There was a minyan mamash, so where he was also zoche that two big Talmidei Chachamim, the son-in-law of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, of Mordechai Toledano, and his grandson, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef Toledano, who's both are Dayanim, were also at this funeral. And the Chevra Kadisha opens the car. They open the back of the car. And everybody thought they're going to see a box. And usually in the box, there's the remains of the deceased. And lo and behold, there was a talit wrapped around what looked like the form of a body. So everybody there obviously gasped. I got a picture. I immediately missed my dear Chavruta at the time, David Walton, was right next to me when I got the picture, and we asked, is that a body? It can't be. And the Chevra Kadisha said, the person from the Chevra Kadisha in Hala Menuchot, mind you, Hala Menuchot has seen everything. The person from the Chevra Kadisha said, his body is completely intact. There's not one worm. And it smells like, there's no smell. It's like he passed away yesterday. Okay? That obviously shook everybody. It's not something you see every day. And they went ahead and buried him. Now, just to make something clear, I also didn't know this. Yerucham Kopelman from the Chevra Kadisha here, he also used to pray in the old Breslov Center. He exhumed his body, and he said, you should know, you didn't know this, but when they buried him here in Miami, because of Corona, the protocols were that all people buried in Miami, all people buried in the cemetery have to be buried in a special nylon bag because of Corona. So additionally, he was buried in a nylon bag, which is even more of a formula for erosion, in Miami in the heat, 3 years. Full body. Not one worm. The body was completely intact. Rabbi Yosef Toledano, Dayan Bar Abba Sharwai said when we brought his body into the kever, so there wasn't enough room, and it was very heavy, I guess because of the soil. He said, I saw with my own eyes how one leg didn't fit in, and one leg went on top of the other leg. So after 3 years, there were still legs to go on top of each other. It wasn't a skeleton, which once again is something that's hard to comprehend. And this hit me very hard. I said, the same person that I sat Shiva for 3 years ago as my father is not the same person that I should have sat Shiva for him. It's a different person. Who was my father? He must have been a very big Tzadik that I didn't know about. My father seemed like an ordinary man, as they say, an ish pashut, who would be kovei itim la Torah and go to minyan. But to not have his body be eaten by worms and decay is something out of the ordinary. It's not something that everybody is zochet to. It's very few are zochet to that. The Gra, they say about the Gaon Mivilna, the Vilna Gaon, he was zochet to that. They say the Sma, I saw in one of the Sfalim, the Sma, which was he wrote one of the main commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, on Choshen Mishpat. He also, when they exhumed him, he was intact. But to be intact in 2020, in 2023, man dachal shemei, as they say. And it gave me a lot to ponder, and I was in shock. I couldn't move, and I was shaken up completely. So automatically, I called the rabbis that I knew. I called one of my rabbis in Israel. His name is Rabbi Ben Zion Cook. He's a student of Rav Elyashiv. And I told him this news. Not only that, there was a friend by the funeral, and he said, his name is Meir Shmueli in Bat Yam. He told me, listen, I was so shaken up, and he's very close to the chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Yitzchak Yosef. Right away, he got in his car after the Levaya, and he ran to the house of Rav Yitzchak Yosef. He has direct access. He knocks on the door, and he goes in. And he told him, you don't understand, the father of David Melamed, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, knows who I am. He said, his father, I was just by his Levaya, and he was completely intact. Even Rav Yitzchak didn't believe it. He said, how can it be? He said, I'm telling you, I saw it with my own eyes. Something that's out of the ordinary. So, once again, going back, I called Rabbi Ben Zion Cook, and he said, let's open the book of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky has a book called Orchot Yosher. This book, he goes through many of the midot by the order of Aleph Bet. And he opens to the part about kin'ah, about jealousy. And Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky brings the following midrash. He brings a midrash in Chupat Eliyahu Rabbah. It's one of the midrashim. And the midrash says the following story. There was a rabbi, there was an Amorah by the name of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, in his backyard, he had a tel, a mound of dirt. And one day he wanted to remove this mound and make it into flat earth. So he called a few of his workers to come and dig out the mound, to remove the mound. The workers came and they started exuding the mound. After one day of digging and digging and digging, all of a sudden, a person comes out of this mound and sits on this mound, on this big pile of dirt. So the workers ask him, who are you? He said, I'm wondering if Tchiyat HaMetim came. He said, Tchiyat HaMetim, what do you mean? We're just removing a mound. So they were shaken up and they went back to their boss, Rav Nachman. They told him, listen, there's a dead person that's talking to us. Go check it out. Rav Nachman went to him and he said, excuse me, sir, what are you doing out of the grave? So he said, I thought it's Tchiyat HaMetim. So Rav Nachman says, no, it's not Tchiyat HaMetim, but how are you a body? You're not supposed to be a complete body. You're supposed to be in the ground. You're supposed to be decaying. Right? The Lashon, the Gemara, it says, we know the pasuk says met nilkav, right? There is a rule that a dead person, right? Ve'elafar tashuv, a person after he passes away, he becomes one with the earth. He says, did you not? The dead person tells back Rav Nachman the following thing. He says, you're a rabbi. A rabbi is supposed to know the pasuk in I think in Mishlei that says ulkav atzamot kin'ah, that what causes bones to decay is kin'ah, is jealousy. And then continues this dead man who is alive now, and he says, Umiyamai lo he'emadeti al midotai. When I was alive, I never hated anybody that caused me pain. Velo tafasti belibi kinat chaverai me'olam. And I never was jealous of any of my friends. ולא סיפרתי בבית הכנסת ובבית המדרש. I never spoke דברים בטלים in shul. ולא נתתי ליבי ואוזניי, אלא לדברי תורה. And my whole life I would only want to hear Torah. So now I don't know if my father was a jealous man. I don't remember him ever saying, why does this guy have this and why does this guy have this? So I guess he wasn't a jealous man. But the next part of this midrash, what follows the jealousy, is I do know very well. And that's mi'amai lo siparti bevet hakneset ubevet hamidrash. I never would speak in bet hakneset and bet hamidrash. My father, whenever he would go to shul and he would see people talking during Kaddish, he would get very, very upset. He even once told me that he once saw a rabbi speaking during Kaddish, and he went up to him and he said, the halakha is you can't speak during Kaddish. Of course, the rabbi laughed at him and mocked at him. But that's the halakha. And it made me wonder, when I see this midrash, people think that tzidkut is measured by knowing Shas. People think tzidkut is measured by doing miracles. But what really measures the greatness of a person is being attuned to the small details, to the things that make us appreciate the beauty and the grandeur and the holiness of our religion, of our beautiful dat that Hashem gave us. And one of them is the opportunity to pray in a Bet Knesset. My father, whenever he would come to shul, to talk with him during prayer was kimat impossible. He would immediately say, shh, not now, after. That was one thing. Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein writes down, he brings that people think that when their parents pass away, so a lot of people say Kaddish. That's brought down in the Midrash. You're supposed to say Kaddish. So Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein says that if a person's saying Kaddish for his parents, and while they were alive, he would talk during Kaddish. So when he says Kaddish, what he's doing really is, he's not being Ma'aleh their Neshama, he's being Morid their Neshama. The importance of not speaking during Kaddish. So that in of itself, I saw in my father. And it reminded me that, this is something to focus on. And the second thing was, Lo natati libi ve'oznai ela lishmoa divrei Torah. I don't know if I can say ela, but I can say one thing, that my father always wanted to hear a chidush. He always wanted to hear something about the parsha. He always wanted to share something, some insight that he had on the parsha, or whether it be in the parsha, or whether it be my father. He never learned in yeshiva properly, so Gemara was not so easy for him. But Tanakh, many people are here that knew him. My father knew it quite well. I can say he knew Nevi'im cold. He knew Yirmiyahu very well. He knew Yechezkel very, very well. Yeshayahu very well. Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet Bichlal. He knew it backwards and forwards. But he always wanted to share. He always wanted to hear more. He always used to tell me, my dream is to be able to go to the Shchunat HaBuchalim and sit in Musayov from morning to night and just hear shiurim. That was his dream. By the time I was born, my father was already in pension. He wasn't working. And he wasn't a person that would constantly be chasing, making more money. He was happy with what he had. He wanted to keep what he had, like every normal person. But there was no tava for more money, more money, more money. He was very complacent with what he had. He was a very simple person. And there's another thing that was very special about my father, and that was the inyan of Shmirat HaLashon. My father, anytime, even during our one time, I once brought a friend to our Seudat Shabbat. My friend said, I never saw anything like this. He said, the whole meal, you were just talking Divrei Torah. I said, I don't know. That's what we do every week. So for him, it wasn't a normal thing. And if we would ever say, me and my mother would start speaking about somebody, my father would sit with his arms crossed like this and say in Hebrew, "Atem chogegim po chava al hazman. Lashon hara etzlechem lo kayam." And it's something that sometimes the people that are not the rabbis and they're not the Talmidei Chachamim, but they have an appreciation for those small things that we don't treat with the utmost sincerity. It comes from them. And when I saw this, that my father was zoche, that his body was completely intact, and we made the matzevah for him in Har HaMenuchot, the son-in-law of Chacham Ovadia Yosef, or Mordechai Toledano, told us, you have to make sure to write on the matzevah, Lo shalta bo rima, that the worms did not eat him. And then B'derech Klal in general, we the Sfaradim, we're very makpid. Whenever we write a matzevah, we don't add too many shvachim. We write very simple things. We write short and to the point. Maybe one or two things that were nice about him, but we don't write long sentences and we don't make a whole asik out of it. Because the Ma'avaria book, he was one of the chachamim from Italy. He wrote a sefer about kol ha'inyanei avelut v'gilgulim v'neshamot. So he writes over there that whatever you write on the matzevah stays forever. And if you write something that's not true, it's a very big kitrug on the neshama. So the Sfaradim, me'azu me'olam, were very, I guess from the 1700s and on, were very careful on what they would write on their matzevah. Even Chacham Ovadia Yosef, he said, when you write my matzevah, only write that I wrote books. The names of my books that I wrote, nothing else. And you see on the matzevah, that's all it says. He was born on this day, died on this day, and the names of his books. So we weren't sure, should we write this, should we not write this? He said, you have to write Lo shalta bo rima. And the lesson that we can all learn from this, I think, is that we never know who's sitting next to us in the synagogue, who's sitting next to us in shul. It might be the guy that's an old man. He looks like the most simple Jew. But as the Gemara already famously says, Elyonim lemata v'tachtonim lemala, that when he reached Shamayim, the Tana said, I saw the people in this world that everybody treated with such awe and such and gasps and everything else, when it came to Shamayim, nobody really cared about them. The simple people, the people that everybody thought were downtrodden, the people that people didn't respect, and there were many instances, many people, unfortunately, there were people that said things about my father. But my father, even towards his old life, he didn't really care. In shul, he was embarrassed numerous times. He would come home crying, but he would never respond to them in shul. He would never embarrass them. But to appreciate every single Jew and what it means to be a simple Jew. And like the saying goes in Hebrew, Liyot Yehudi Pashut, Lo Pashut. I'd like to thank everybody for coming again, for sharing in the yard site of my father. And all the words that we said should be Leilui Nishmat Molavi. And before I